I'm delighted to have you join us with our Clean Cities webinar series. Today, it's part 2, Introduction to Renewable Liquid Fuels, Fleet Experiences Using Renewable Diesel and Biodiesel Blends. And I'd like to thank the Clean Cities coalitions that have worked so hard to bring this together, and also our panelists who have been kind enough to join us today and share their fleet experiences. All right, let's get started. Next slide, please. My name is Tammy Bostic. I will be your moderator today. I'm the director of Utah Clean Cities and a proud participant in the Clean Cities program. Next slide, please. I'd like to welcome today's speakers. We have Amy Regenball. She's a fuel manager and supervisor for the Oregon Department of Transportation. We have Gary Lynch, who's the Fleet Services Director of Eugene Water and Electric Board. And then we also have Keith Shields, who's the Fleet Director Director of Fleet Services, City of Knoxville. Welcome, Amy, Gary, and Keith. I wanted to do a quick Clean Cities overview and how it pertains to our program as a whole, but also how it relates to renewable fuels and our alternative fuel corridor. Next slide, please. Programs are part of a 90 coalition collective. There are over 90 Clean Cities programs across the nation, and we're all here to work with you. The Clean Cities Coalition model consists of local coalitions in each state, and sometimes there are more than several in each state, as the example of California. And we're here to foster change in our communities and to help with federal resources and expertise. Further, we're here to promote public and private partnerships and to advance the stakeholder participation in our Clean Cities programs and our state initiatives. Next slide, please. And as we talk about these programs and these fuels, the Clean Cities programs work with over 12 different advanced and alternative fuels. And we like to say in our Clean Cities program that there are no perfect fuels, but there's certainly a common sense solution. And the Clean Cities Network work with all of these fuels in various capacities, and certainly are always here to look at advancing a new opportunity to look at an advanced fuel fleet, and we are always working on our corridors. And as I've mentioned, there are alternative corridors across the nation, and we have the tools and the capacity to help build out those corridors with our stakeholders. If you look at the choice at the pump, which is what we work for, we have biofuels, biodiesel, electricity, ethanol, hydrogen, natural gas, and propane. All of those are available in renewable forms, and that's an exciting piece as we look at carbon benefiting projects and opportunities. And again, we want to make sure that there's a clear choice at the pump and that you have an opportunity to have a diversified fuel portfolio, not only in your state, but for your fleet, and as you travel across the various intermountain and regional states in our area. Next slide, please. One of the ways that we do this and we support our partnerships with our stakeholders, whether they be a public or private partnership, is that we work with federal and state agencies. We work to make sure that there are incentives in place and that we're able to work with the laws and the regulations. There are opportunities for all of you to access grants, funding, and other opportunities with your Clean Cities Network. We work really hard every year to work with our stakeholders and our partners to make sure that they know about the Vehicle Technology Office's offering of grants and opportunities. This year we ran through about $32 million in grant opportunity, and we're excited to see what those outcomes will be with our latest submissions. We also work with Transportation Energy Partners, which work with federal policies to make sure that our federal leaders know what our local Clean Cities folks do with our stakeholders in our individual states, so they know that indeed those federal dollars are making a difference on a local level. As you can see in this slide, we're talking about our Alternative Fuels Data Center, and they offer an up-to-date, verifiable opportunity to look at fueling stations across our nation and specifically in our states. You can map out your routes, and you can certainly find biodiesel and renewable fuels and the full collect across our nation. This slide here just shows the availability of biodiesel on those red dots. And so you can see that there's some opportunity there to expand our corridors and certainly to make sure that biodiesel is available at the pump. As you can see along the Western corridors, we have a great presence of biodiesel. It's available to everyone. So it's a fantastic pop-in fuel. So again, a recap of our introduction of part 1, which we held last week on June 17th. And I wanted to say it, and before we get started with our speakers, I'd like to give you a quick recap of part 1. And in case you missed it, part 1 will be available for viewing through your local coalition. We covered the differences between biofuels and renewable diesel. Both are made from the same feedstocks and use different processes. The renewable diesel can be purchased for about the same price as petroleum diesel in California and Oregon because of the low carbon fuel standard. Hopefully, it'll be in Washington too someday. The domestic supply of renewable diesel is expanding rapidly, and renewable diesel is chemically identical to petroleum diesel, but with a 60 to 80% emission reduction. It is a drop-in fuel that can be blended in any combination with other diesel fuel. It is magic in the tank, as we like to say. So again, the recordings will be available through your Clean Cities or your local Clean Cities. Next slide, please. So again, I want to welcome our speakers, and also as we go along, please put your questions into the chat box. That gives us an opportunity to address your questions specifically as we wrap up and create sort of a panel piece where we'll be able to address questions to our speakers today. This will be hosted and facilitated by Richard Battersby. So again, as we go along and you have questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll get them ready for the end of the webinar to have a great and lively discussion of renewable biofuels. So thank you. Next slide. Our first speaker today is Amy Regenbaugh. She again is the field manager and supervisor of the Oregon Department of Transportation. So let's hear from Amy and welcome.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Amy Regenbaugh and I am the Fuel Management Program Supervisor here at the Oregon Department of Transportation. I have worked for the agency in the fleet division for 13 years. When biodiesel was introduced to our fuel tanks, no one was prepared for the cleaning effects it would have on the tanks and the cold weather issues that we would experience. The fleet division soon realized that they needed to implement a fuel management program, and I was lucky enough to get involved from the beginning. In 2019, ODOT burned through over 2 million gallons of diesel. We have 53 diesel tanks spread across the state. Each region in Oregon has its own unique environment. In the coastal region, we contend with a lot of moisture in the air. Especially troublesome is dealing with the corrosive properties of the salt air near the ocean. In the mountains, we can get a tremendous amount of snow. We use cinder to throw down on the roads, and we have found that the dust from the cinder piles can contaminate the fuel in the tanks. In Central Oregon, the temperatures in the winter will often drop to the minus in double digits, causing slow flow and gelling issues. Eastern Oregon is very dry. It can also get very cold. We learned that during the summer months, as the days got warmer and the nights remained very cold, it was a perfect environment for the moisture to get drawn into the tanks and promote microbial growth. When biodiesel was first introduced in 2007, like everyone else, we experienced a lot of gelling and plugged filters. We know now that biodiesel works as a solvent and was in effect cleaning the tanks, causing the filters to plug. We also learned that because of the water in biodiesel, it promoted microbial growth like we had never seen before. Biodiesel has a limited shelf life, and because we do not turn over fuel like a retail station, fuel degradation was an issue as well. In 2017, we introduced renewable diesel. At first, we started with a 20% blend because we were concerned about the performance in the winter. We were advised that cold flow additives that work on biodiesel would not work on renewable diesel. And because it was a new alternative fuel with limited suppliers, consistent supply was also an issue. After a successful pilot in 2017 using renewable diesel in the High Cascades at 3 locations, and the supply seemed stabilized, we increased our blend to R99. As I mentioned earlier, with the onset of issues when biodiesel was introduced, Fleet created a fuel management program. We recognized that we needed to address these issues to keep our equipment up and running. In the beginning, we started with having all the fuel tested in all of the bulk fuel tanks. And boy, were we shocked to see how bad some of the tanks were. We found heavy microbial growth and large amounts of sediment and water. Next step we took was to have the tanks cleaned. This included filtering the fuel to remove the bugs, the sediment, and the water. And we also had the insides of the tanks cleaned as well. Another decision we made was to move to 10-micron filters at the pump to prevent cross-contamination to the equipment. Going to a smaller micron filter also added to the challenge. The upside to introducing renewable diesel is that we did not experience those same issues. Because of the way renewable diesel is processed, it does not act like a solvent. It does not have the water content like biodiesel. As we converted our tanks from biodiesel to renewable diesel, we did not experience any increase in filter plugging. As a matter of fact, we realized we were changing filters a lot less often. Another benefit with renewable diesel is the extended shelf life. It is a stable fuel that does not break down quickly. And on a side note, we found that our equipment that typically idles more had a reduction in regens. And actually, when regens stopped when we moved to R99. The bulk fuel management program's been in place for about 8 years now, and we do have all the fuels tested at least once a year. And now that all of the tanks have been cleaned and treated, issues have greatly reduced. Now we rarely experience gelling issues. We have not had a positive test for microbial growth in a couple of years. We also found that we do not need to change the filters at the pumps nearly as often. And the maintenance crews are especially happy that they experience less downtime due to fuel issues. And now that we have clean tanks and clean fuel, we added some tools to our toolbox to continue using these alternative fuels successfully. What are we doing? Well, we put desiccant breathers on all the above ground diesel tanks. We found that these were very effective in reducing the amount of water and sediment that was getting in the tanks through the vents as the tanks breathe. Typically, we change the desiccant breather about once a year, but we do find that on the coast, we may have to change it more than once a year. I feel like one of the best decisions we ever made was in installing diesel fuel polishers on all of our above ground tanks. The ones that we chose are meant to run 24/7, constantly moving the fuel and filtering it. These have been very effective in removing water and sediment. Since having these installed, we have had almost no outbreaks of microbial growth, and it's been interesting. Since having these installed, we've had almost no gelling events, including biodiesel. I don't know if it's because it keeps the fuel moving, or if it's because they've removed the major contributors to gelling, or maybe just a combination of both. And we also installed wireless fuel tank monitors on all of our tanks. This helps us to schedule fuel deliveries more effectively. It helps us to keep fuel levels from getting too low, with the idea that if there's less airspace in the tank, it's less likely to draw in water and sediment from the air. Oregon does have a B5 mandate for all diesel dispensed in the state, and the Oregon Department of Transportation has a formal sustainability plan. The short-term goal is that 35% of the diesel used by ODOT fleet is B20 equivalent, and a long-term goal is 100%. Thanks to the ability to dispense R99 year-round and expand our use of B20, 69% of our diesel use is B20 equivalent. So as we expand our renewable diesel use and our B20 use, we are certainly on track to meet these goals. As the focus on transportation fuels, especially diesel, becomes more critical, I am excited to introduce these alternative fuels for our fleet and ensure these fuels work in our equipment so our ODOT folks can do their jobs and not have to think about it. Thank you for listening today. I have included my contact information, and I've included our fuels analyst, Ethan Healy's contact information as well. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. It's essential that we have the real world experiences explained by Amy, the challenges and the opportunities and the quick fixes and the long fixes. So that's exciting to hear. It's important that we hear, again, from fleets in the real world. It doesn't show up that way in the laboratory. So great job, Amy. And we're excited to hear more about your success with renewable diesel. Next up, we have Gary Lynch. Take it away, Gary.
Okay. First of all, hello, and I want to thank everybody for attending the Clean Cities webinar series. I was asked by Brian Trice if I would share our story about what we've done in fuel, and we've actually done some crazy things here, we might say, and basically it's trying to justify the money. Again, I'm Gary Lynch, CFM, Fleet Manager for Eugene Water and Electric Board here in Eugene, Oregon. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or to any Clean Cities representative. With that, I want to thank Clean City staff and Tammy for being our moderator today. And with that, I'd like to share our story. And before I kind of get started with the overview, I went to work for EWEB, Eugene Water Electric Board. We call ourselves EWEB here. 10 years, or actually 11 years ago, it's in 2009. And one of the very first tasks I got walking in very first week was, what are we going to do about our greenhouse gas reduction goals? And first of all, what are they? So I found out by 2020, we had to reduce our greenhouse emissions by 25% below 2009 levels. Well, gee, that was the year I started here. By 2030, we had to replace fossil fuel use by 50%. And by 2050, our operations are to be carbon neutral. So with that, we have really tried to reach out some different products. And I want to give you basically an overview of what we have here. I'm going to share 10 years of historic fuel costs for fuel, what we actually paid for fuel here at UM. I'm going to talk to you about some of the benefits of using renewable fuels, some of the ones that actually pertain near and dear to me in my heart. And then I'm going to share a calculator with you that basically how we calculate our emissions and our costs, and we actually report out on it on a monthly basis. This chart that you see here, this is actually 10 years of historic costs for us. And if you come back, and when we started tracking this is Q1 2010, the dark blue line, that is B5. In Amy's and other presentations, we are a B5 mandated state. B20 is the green line. And towards the end, you see a red line, and that is actually R99. It could be called RD99, but for the purpose of the chart here, we wanted to demonstrate it. And then you can see on here, basically alternative fuels track generally the same thing is what petroleum fuels do. So if the market goes up, alternative fuel costs go up, and then you can see in the chart as we come along. We started out with running a B20 back in 2010. At times, I run B30, and there was even at one point I actually kicked it up to a B50 for a time, and we brought it back down to a B30 in our fleet. In around 2015, we actually, September 11th, 2015, we actually switched over to renewable diesel overnight. We were probably one of the top 5 fleets that were actually on the West Coast that actually made the change. And we were the very first ones out of Oregon and Washington to actually go to this new fuel. And what you kind of see on it, the price was affordable at the time. It kind of made sense. We tried it. It tracked for long till we got into probably later 2017. And then all of a sudden we started seeing the price of renewable diesel really pick up. And a lot of this was California's Clean Fuels program was really taking off. It was a hot market. Vendors and distributors were taking fuel. Anybody have any type of alternative fuels were taking them down to California because they were getting so much for their credits. And supply and demand just actually rose the price for us. During that time, you kind of see a pretty good spike in it. We actually had to drop off our 99 for a little while and we blended it back to an R50 just to stay affordable. Towards the end of last year, we started seeing a trend where Oregon's program really started taking off, and those prices for the R99 really came down. And you want to kind of look at the last few quarters that we're on here. This actually started last year, so you can't say this is a pandemic or anything else thing on it. Look how close the prices are with fuel. So anybody that's out there, it doesn't matter if you want to get to biodiesel, and biodiesel is a good fuel. I'm not knocking biodiesel by any means on doing, but if you look at the trend and the cost, they're extremely getting really close in price. So there's no reason a fleet shouldn't be running an alternative fuel based off of that price. The benefits for using renewable diesel, emission reduction, obviously, we'll talk about that. Energy independence, a lot of fleets really should be looking at energy independence. I'm going to talk a little bit about reduced maintenance. We've had great presenters on here that are actually going to get a little bit deeper into maintenance. And then I'm going to talk about the portability of it. So reducing emissions by using diesel fuel as a baseline, nothing in it. If you were a fleet or your state mandates you go to a different fuel, such as a B5, depend on where the feedstock comes in. And I'm using weighted average numbers here. So, the canolas, the soy, to different things would have a different number, but weighted average on a B5, the reduction in emissions for your fleet's about 2.1%. Remember, I have that goal of having to get up there to 25%. So this is when we kicked up. We did the B20, it got us up 8.5%. The UCO, that's basically cooking oil, used cooking oil. It definitely has a higher emission reduction factor. That's weighted average is about 16.4%. But when we started going in and running renewable diesel, we got a little bit higher blends. And what we were seeing is those emission reductions, weighted average is 33.4. And even running R99, which that's actually the blend we're running today, we're seeing a reduction here in Oregon of about 66.3%. Talked a little bit about energy independence, and the reality is for any fleet professional, no matter where you're at, a vendor, a fleet manager, Clean Cities, it's important to understand the dynamics of fuel supply and what the markets have on them. And again, the reality is the biggest percentage of petroleum reserves that we can readily get, fairly available, does come from the Middle East. And that kind of leads to the general concern with, worldwide fuel shortages. If we're unable to do that, there's a lot of conflict that happens over in the Middle East, and it's been going on for years. And that's always kind of left out what we've had here. And the reality is our appetite for petroleum fuel continues to grow. And as we ask for more and more of it, the supply of it's going to be dropping off. A little bit about reduced maintenance, and some of the presenters will get a little bit more in detail here. I'm going to play this clip here for you. And I don't know if the sound's coming in on your end or not, but this is from Nestle. And the fuel that you see on the left is renewable diesel. The one on the right is fossil fuel. That black stuff you're seeing, that's that black sooty stuff that's going right up, and it's going actually into your DPF, your exhaust system. And as that exhaust system starts plugging up on doing them, we get the check engine lights. I'll shut that off. We get the check engine lights that come on the dashes. We got mechanics having to go out and regen them. Hopefully they do it on their own, if they're able to. But it even gets to a point where you actually start getting a dirty DPF filter. You have to pull them off and get them professionally cleaned. All right. For us, we're a fleet. We've been running, like I said, 2015 renewable diesel. And in that time, I have never had to pull off a DPF and take it out and have it cleaned in there. We have regens every now and then, but we didn't have the frequency of regens we had back then. So for us, that's a true story. It's the way it works. The other thing we're seeing with renewable diesel, and a lot of fleets are starting to see in here, is we have an oil analyzer in our fleet. So we actually look at the oil and what's the condition of it. And when you compare oil to fleets that are running regular fossil fuel or bios out there, there's a lot of soot that's in your oil analysis. And that soot and that stuff's actually what's making that inside of that oil really dirty looking, and you're actually gets some pretty high levels. The trucks we're running that are running renewable diesel, we don't have that soot level. It's the same thing that we just saw that's happening through the exhaust system. It's the same thing that's getting down in our engines. So to a fleet, one of the things out there, does that mean we can extend oil life? We don't have to drop oil as much, maybe bring the truck in for service, but we just check the oil, and if the oil's good, keep running it. Why would we change it? There's a huge cost savings right there, not to mention just the waste of having used oil. So I think we're going to see more fleets looking at it from a different point of view. And, if you got cleaner oil in your engine, maybe that engine's going to last longer, which actually makes our trucks last longer. This slide here, we talk a little bit about affordability. I got these numbers from a conference I went to back in 2017, and they were talking about what goes into a gallon of oil or a gallon of fuel. And so essentially, one of the things I kind of remember behind it was feedstocks account for about 40% of the cost of every gallon. When we look at gasoline, or diesel out there, that crude oil cost is 50 to 60%. So it's actually the feedstocks, it's actually the lower amount on here. Our refining cost, though, is quite a bit higher. And the reason why is just mass quantities. You look at when they bring petroleum and oil and they take it in the refinery, they're so big and complex and they run through so much volume, the cost per gallon actually really drops that number down. When we're talking alternative fuels distribution, we got the world figured out when it comes to fossil fuel. We can take and move from refinery to cities to be able to, put it in your gas tanks, or the fuel tanks that you get it in. We got that down. When it comes to alternative fuels, we struggle with that because it's a little bit different sector. We don't have the infrastructure. You just can't put it in a pipeline. And obviously taxes take up a pretty good percentage of the fuel for every gallon we buy. So when we talk about alternative fuels, in today's in there is the environment and the problems that we have on here that affect air quality, climate change, emissions. That's all one of the things that that's why we do alternative fuels, and face reality, burning fossil fuels create health and social problems. We just can't ignore it. We just can't put our head in the sand. And pretty much what you saw, and that was on that first chart I was talking about, in a competitive free market, more alternative fuel into the system, and you're actually starting to see that market get closer and closer to where, the actually overall fuel costs, we're seeing that very affordable. Clean Cities programs help as far as or not Clean City program, the state's programs obviously help with that. And with that, I want to share, this is a calculator that we put together. And how this pretty much works is up here in the top in section A, this right here tells me that if I wasn't having anything in my fuel, I didn't have any mandated fuels or anything else, and these are our real numbers that we have year to date going into it. That's how much gasoline and how much diesel we put in our fuel. We're able to pull out the emissions in metric tons of what it is, and it tells us up here in fossil fuels. By section B, this is that baseline we use. And then again, Oregon, we're at E5 and in E10. And I know in different parts of the country, they have different mandates. Sometimes it's just a city or a county mandate. It may be, but Oregon, it's a state mandate. So just by being able to do that, you can see we've had a little bit of reduction in emissions on there. And we've actually, alternative fuel, you can see a little bit behind it. And this is the actual price. So what we've done on this calculator, and this is our current fuel program, is we monitor prices similar to that first spreadsheet I was showing about that chart. And these are actual year-to-date cost prices for the fuels. And we still run a little B5. We have trucks that still fill up at a card lot, or have to be that, or our upriver generation facilities where we're just unable to get the renewable diesel. And again, the rest of our sites, we're running renewable diesel. Now, we're a fleet on the gasoline side too. E10 is a state mandate, card locks and upriver, okay? We started back in 2015 running E15 in our truck. I went almost a whole year before I told anybody we were doing it because we didn't have a problem. We didn't see any issues with vehicles. I watched it really close. I knew the day I went out to pull everybody in the shop and we switched to E15, you'll hear this, oh, never run, never work. Well, a little over a year ago, I switched to E20. And I don't know if they know yet or not, but we still don't have any issues. We have not had a fuel-related issue. So in my fleet right now, I run E20 and we run E85. So we're picking up a lot of benefits by reducing emissions and also by using the alternative fuels. And with that, this is the calculator, and I believe you're still seeing it on here. I have got a sustainable summary here of where we're at with our fuel. And right now, our metric ton emissions, let's see if I can make that just a little bit bigger for you. Maybe not. But anyway, we reduced, 266 metric tons of emissions. Remember that goal, that lofty goal of 25% reduction? Right now, we're running 33.1 for my whole entire fleet. Remember that 50% by 2030? Right now, 57.7% of my fleet is alternative fuel on doing it. What was the cost? Year to date, it's cost me a little over $5,000 or 0.7 cents a gallon, 7.77. So it's about a 4.5% increase. Right now, it's costing me, it's about $19 to reduce 1 metric ton. So if you go out there and you kind of look at, I'm going to buy a CNG garbage truck, hypothetically, for fleets that are out there. And how much more do you pay for that CNG garbage truck? And when you turn around, you look at the benefits, how many metric tons I'm going to save over the years, that could be hundreds or thousands of dollars a metric tons. And you're out there by switching to fuel, and you can do it for 19, the 128 there. That's Oregon's program. That's our Clean Fuels program. That's what our credit value is today. So with that, I appreciate everybody's time and listening. This is our story, and I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Gary. That was an amazing presentation. What a great opportunity to see, again, a real fleet making a difference and using the renewable fuels and the renewable diesel. That's incredible. And that you've already met your goals and are out achieving your goals is even more inspiring. So again, your presentation was wonderful. Thank you so much. And next up, we have Keith Shields, who's the Director of Fleet Services for the City of Knoxville. Thank you for joining us today, Keith, and let's hear what you have to share.
All right, I'd like to thank the Clean Cities Coalitions. Good morning, good afternoon, respectively. Thank you for reaching out to let us tell our story about our renewable diesel test that we did and the favorable results we had. Next slide, please. The City of Knoxville fleet is 1,500 plus vehicles. We have a light duty and heavy duty garage. We have maintenance, fuel, impound, and car wash. We recently were in the top 100 best fleets. We won the Green Leadership Award from the PERC organization for our propane mower fleet last year, and recently started an apprentice program with our local technical school that's located here in Knoxville. Next slide. Need to thank Nicole and Gary for presenting a good lead-in, and actually Gary for presenting a lot of facts and data that are related to renewable diesel. We were fortunate to attend GFX in Nashville, Tennessee a few years ago, and had the benefit of meeting quite a few people from the West Coast, to include Gary. Being the fleet skeptics that we are, we did not believe the advertising for the miracle fuel, it's gold in the tank, and all the other accolades that went with the renewable diesel. We had Jeff Johnson, my vehicle shop manager here in Knoxville, had numerous conversations with fleet managers, and finally we were able to purchase a tank load of renewable diesel out of New Orleans area. I have to give a shout out to Jonathan Overly with our local East Tennessee Clean Cities organization for helping us do that and getting us the contacts we needed. You can go ahead and switch to the next slide, please. So the problem we were having in Knoxville is we had a number of trucks that we were doing a manual regen weekly, every other day. It just depended on the duty cycle of that truck. In our municipality, we pick up brush and leaves. So you can imagine a vehicle that idles for 5 to 10 minutes picking up brush or leaves, drives maybe 25 or 50 yards, stops, idles again, and picks up another pile of brush and leaves. So when you see a picture for the worst duty cycle for diesel engine, it was a picture of a few of our trucks that were problematic in our case. Next slide, please. Some of the things that were a hindrance is, once again, RD is not readily available here in Tennessee. We were able to purchase 7,500 gallons. There was quite a significant upcharge of $1.30 a gallon roughly. We were able to make those 7,500 gallons last for 8 weeks, but we isolated 5 trucks to fuel only from that fuel site, while allowing the rest of our fleet to fuel there also, to include fire trucks and other diesel equipment. There was only a select few of 3 or 4 people who actually knew what we had done. We told the operators that there was a fuel additive we wanted to try, much to Gary's little secret there, and asked them to keep a log of their manual regens and how they were doing, and things of that nature. So it was eye-opening for us. Some of the things we did is Jeff took a jar and put some in the freezer to test and see whether or not it would freeze. We did not do that. So all things being said, we were quite pleased with the results of what the renewable diesel gave us, other than the additional price per gallon. So next slide, please. Before the study, as you can see there, manual regens were required frequently. Force regens required. Oil dilution, our oil analysis, really, you can see the difference there. During the study, the subject trucks that we had identified as our 5 hot ones had no force regens on any of the test vehicles. The manual regens were reduced. And we had no blending issues or any other issues with dropping the fuel in the tank. We have 2 diesel fueling sites. We selected the smaller one and just dumped the fuel in that one site and forced the trucks to fuel at that one site. Next slide, please. In summary, the renewable diesel was everything it promised and more. It reduced the regens, it reduced our maintenance on our end. When you think about the big picture of the maintenance you perform on your vehicles, and anything additional that you have to do is strictly time taken away from your primary duties and your task of preventative maintenance. And the last thing I'll do is just give a shout out for attending conferences and other things of that nature. We were very fortunate to go to GFX, and we made a good network of peers from the West Coast that really provided us great information and great resources. And we look forward to continuing our relationship with Clean Cities and the other fleets in the area, and wherever else we can be assistance to somebody. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Amy, Gary, and Keith, for the incredible and inspiring fleet stories about renewable diesel. It is seemingly magic in the tank, and it's incredible to think that it's a drop-in fuel and that no additional infrastructure is needed, and that indeed it does perform as it is stated. So it's great to see it actually deployed and to hear these great stories back. So I'm going to turn the time over to Richard Battersby. He's going to actually field the question and answer a piece and direct those questions to the appropriate panelist. So Richard, are you there?
Yep. Hey, this is Richard. I was on super secret double mute, but I think I got that solved.
Thanks,
to
Richard.
the participants, if you have any questions, please, for the panelists, please type them in the chat box. We did get a question from Matt regarding the pricing of renewable diesel, and the question was, there's a premium for B20 over R99 and B5 in Oregon, wondering if there was any reason. And Gary was able to confirm that the pricing listed was accurate, and we do in California also see some pricing is inconsistent at times. Sometimes we see B20 priced less than renewable diesel, less than petroleum diesel, ostensibly because of the bio content, and maybe it's made locally so you don't have that transport cost. But then we see B99 priced significantly above all fuels. So if the B20 is cheaper because of the bio content, you would think B99 would be less expensive, but maybe it's due to quantities and being smaller and transportation affecting the cost. But for us, renewable diesel is pretty much tracked right with petroleum diesel. Actually, it's been about 5 to 10 cents lower per gallon for the last couple of years. And we see B20 in that same area. But there's all kinds of different factors. There's different regulatory requirements. And again, the transportation cost can influence it. And I share this information with you just because we've struggled to figure out why for many years. And really at the end of the day, all we can figure out is, well, that's just the price that they're able to command in that area. So sorry for the long detail. Hopefully we've got some more questions out there. We got a great panel today. Especially of interest, the DPF study should be of great interest to fleet managers out there, not just because of the reduced maintenance and repair costs and the lower downtime costs, because we all know when you're going to manual regen, that vehicle comes offline, but you also have significant fuel savings when you're not having to do those manual regens. So that folks have asked before about fuel economy improvements with renewable diesel. And I think, you know, if there has been any, it's been a slight increase in fuel economy using renewable diesel. But by avoiding those manual regens, not only are you keeping your equipment on the road and lowering your maintenance costs, but you're also burning less fuel. So that's something we need to keep bringing forward as we use this fuel longer. We are discovering the benefits are you know, greater than we anticipated. So there goes my filibuster. I was just trying to talk while we got some questions, and I don't think I was very successful.
No, that was fantastic, Richard. I think we're all just, I mean, we're getting a lot of feedback from people saying fantastic, it was great. People are inspired by it. I want to let everybody know who's still with us that we will be emailing the webinar to you. We will also be updating you on the next in our series of webinar pieces. And if there's any additional questions, we'll be reaching back out to the panelists if we need to. But super excited to see the interest let's see. I know we have some more questions coming in.
I've got two questions now
Good.
from Kelly, and this could be for either or both Gary and Keith. Do any of you feel like you need to clean your tanks or do any prep work before putting renewable diesel in the tanks?
So this is Gary. Our tanks were fairly new, so we didn't do anything to our tanks at all. But I've heard of other fleets. It's just that it's just the stuff in the bottom of the tank. You can put a different fuel, you're still going to have stuff in the bottom of the tank. So I recommend getting them cleaned.
Great. Thank you, Gary.
This is Keith. I'll jump in. We actually just dropped it in right on the diesel tank that we were using, and we did not have any issues one way or the other. The thing that I will add is that during the test, we were able to make the fuel last about 8 weeks. And during that time, the trucks, our subject trucks, had no regens. After we had the next load of diesel put in, they started using diesel again. It was a matter of a week or two before we started having the regen issue again, those trucks. So the renewable diesel really burned hotter and cleaner and prevented those regens from even occurring. So from that standpoint, it was a noticeable, very visible activity that happened after we went back to the regular diesel.
Great. Thank you, Keith. We have another question from Keith Wilson regarding concerns that OEM manufacturers might not honor engine warranties using B20. Are there any OEM issues now warranty-wise with using B20, R50, or R99?
So I'm going to jump in a little bit on that. This is Gary. When you're looking at renewable diesel, it actually meets the same standard as regular diesel fuel. I believe it's the ASTM. It's a 975, I believe. Is that correct, Richard? Out there. So
yes,
when you're out there,
ASTM 975.
yeah. So when you, like, for an example, and we've dealt with our Ford dealer here on where we've had some other issues, and it actually says in the Ford manual under fuel, it has to meet that standard. Well, if you have renewable diesel and you're getting it from a reputable supplier, and it just says right there in literature and their specs that it meets that spec, it can't say a whole lot. Now, when you're talking with biodiesel, now we're talking another standard, and so they're able to put a cap on what that percentage is as long as it meets that.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. That's been our experience as well. R99 is chemically identical to petroleum diesel, so it's not capable of voiding a manufacturer's warranty. Biodiesel, especially B20 grades, the manufacturers want to make sure that their engine is certified. We do have another question regarding any more experience to share regarding cold weather performance with renewable diesel, which obviously I in California don't have much experience with, but perhaps Gary or Keith can answer that.
All right, well, while maybe Ethan's jumping on, I was going to say, if he's not there, we do have a question, and maybe if Ethan can't answer it. Richard, did you see the one about the tank, the 20-year-old tank directed to Amy? And it basically says we have a, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I do see the question. Renewable diesel, this is something that has been hashed out in California, where we have the strictest regulations in the country regarding underground storage tanks. And in fact, up until this year, we were limited to biodiesel blends of B20 or lower. And prior to that, you could only store B5 in an underground storage tank. The reason I share that is both the Water Resources Board, State Board for Water Resources, and Air Resources Board issued a letter basically clarifying that renewable diesel is treated exactly the same as petroleum diesel for purposes of storage, use, or dispensing. So what that means is any tank you can put petroleum diesel in, you can put renewable diesel in without any challenges or special hurdles to jump.
So
I
Richard,
wanted
this
to
is,
just pop in and say there was a great comment from Tammy Alexander saying, look at the BQ 9000 certification for your biodiesel supplier to ensure the quality product. And that ties back into our last webinar series, part 1, where we have some fantastic suppliers. So not all fuels are the same. So making sure that you have the good quality product is essential to make sure that you have the results that these folks are getting. Thank you.
yeah. I'm going to jump in on the question about the cold weather performance, if that's okay. And what happens when they make renewable diesel, they can frack it in different ways or make it for a different product where it actually has a colder weather out point or flow point on doing it. So they actually can make it where it gets down to minus 43 degrees below zero. They call it Arctic blends. You know, so they use it more in Europe where they actually put stuff up if they run the fuel up in the North Slope. When you get bio or renewable diesel, and it's probably the same way with regular fuel, and it goes down to Southern California. The manufacturers that are making that really aren't worried about that cold flow property. So they may be no issues with it. If that particular truck would happen to by chance come up to Washington or something else and then work in that area up there and it doesn't go, well, they probably would burn through that fuel in the tank before they got there. But if it was in a higher altitude, I've heard of fleets where they've had some issues. With the fuel we've had up here in the Northwest, I haven't heard of any fleets that have had an issue with any type of cold flow properties. Matter of fact, the fleet manager for Deschutes County Road Department up there, when he started with doing that, he actually went out and bought a refrigerator, a freezer that got down, I think inside it got to like 20 degrees below zero. It was a special freezer that he had. And what he did is he took regular B5 fuel and then he mixed it with, you know, so he does his number 1, number 2, because his theory was it gets really cold in there in the wintertime. It can get down to 7 degrees below zero and 10 degrees in the wintertime. He just wanted to see what the fuel looked like when it got there. And the fuel that actually performed the best was R99. There was no additives, nothing in it. It was still a liquid form where everything else he had on it had already turned to gel. So I'm not sure if I think it just depends on where you get your fuel. I hope that's an easy way to answer that question.
We have, in the meantime, I've typed a couple of answers in the chat regarding renewable diesel and biodiesel being able to be blended together, and that is possible. The fuels are interchangeable between renewable biodiesel and petroleum diesel, so they mix well. And there was a question about plastic-based fuel, and that is, I have heard that plastic is potentially going to be a feedstock for fuel production, but I don't really have any further information or experience with it. It's a relatively new technology. But once that fuel is available in quantity, we'll know more about it and be able to assess it. And I'm looking and I see there was another question about running E10 and E20 modifications required to the vehicle, which Tammy Alexander answered. And basically E10, this is our experience as well. E10, the newer vehicles are certified to run on that. To do E20, you don't want to do that unless you have a flex fuel vehicle. There's movement to raise the fuel blending threshold to E15. I don't think that's been fully executed, but it's kind of like Haley's comment, it comes up every 7 months. So there's a push to increase the ethanol content in gasoline fuels. But obviously with the other priorities our nation's facing right now, those discussions are pretty much tabled.
Yeah, well, we picked that up there, Richard, was a lot of the fuel caps on new vehicles. It just says goes up to E20 on doing them. So we just started putting it in and we have seen no ill effects at all.
Well, that's great information. You know, unfortunately, I don't think our fleet's going to be buying any newer vehicles for a few years due to the budget situation. So buyer beware if you put it in existing vehicle.
Yeah. So just start with E15 and don't own the one for a year, especially your mechanics. And then when they find out it's such a great fuel, and for us, like I say, it's no longer an issue. And for us, we did it basically to reduce fossil fuel. It's kind of what's put us out there to where across our fleet, what we're able to reduce.
Hey,
Great.
Richard.
Well, yes.
Hey, this is Ethan with ODOT. Apparently I was muted on your guys' end, but if you still want me to chime in on the cold weather stuff or the altitude questions, I can do that.
Love it.
Yeah, that'd be great. The question was experience with running renewable diesel in cold weather.
Okay, so yeah, we've run it all of last winter. This has been the most R99 that we've used through the cold months to date. Last year we ran almost 100,000 gallons of R99, and since we kept it at a lot of sites all winter, instead of switching back over this previous winter, I think we're up to almost 350,000 gallons used this year. We've run it in snow blowers, our plow trucks, graders, everything at a lot of our mountain sites this last winter, and we did not have any gelling issues at any sites. Granted, we had a fairly mild winter, but we had it at sites as high as around 5,000 feet through Central Oregon and the Cascades there. We also had it at some of our sites up at Mount Hood. No issues there. Some of those sites have above ground tanks, some are underground. And some of those blowers sit out on the side of the road for a few days before they get fired back up again. And that was a concern that we would have some gelling in some of the fuel filter bowls and things like that, but we did not have any of those issues. So we're going to continue on this path. We've got that fuel at 25 sites now currently. When Amy made this, it was 23. And we're going to keep expanding now that the supply and delivery options has gotten better. So,
Ethan, you mentioned altitude. Does altitude seem to have a role or create any issues with renewable diesel?
It hasn't yet for us. Some of our tanks are a couple years old. Some of them are close to 20 years old. So, I mean, when we add that fuel into a new location, I haven't had any issues whatsoever on whether it was a biofuel in the tank or if we had a lot of sites that pretty much only run off-road equipment too. So they were running off-road fuel, but they've switched over some of those to R99 and I haven't had any problems with that either. But we also have fuel polishers on most of our tanks that are remote. So, and those run 24/7. So that seems to keep our tanks a lot cleaner. It's pulling off the bottom of the tank. It's running it through that polisher and then dumping it back on top. So that fuel is always moving and that's always taking stuff out of it. So.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Hey, Brian, looks like we're about 5 minutes over and I think we've answered all the questions. So we should probably wrap up.
Very good.
Fantastic. So thank you to our Clean Cities folks. And if you have any questions, please reach out to your local Clean Cities Coalition coordinators. They're listed here. And as I stated earlier, we will be sending out the webinar, which will include the slides for your use and review and further inquiry into renewable diesel. So very exciting today. What a great webinar. Thank you for everyone for participating. And thank you for the dream team that put this together. And we look forward to having you join us in the future.